Hey, welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator. And I'm here in season 12. We are so excited to be back this season and to be coming at you with new content. And, last season we got to talk with Dr. Suzanne Bartholomew all about the topic of kids and money. And we're going to kind of be following a similar model this season, but similar, but also switching it up. I don't know. But we're really excited. Our co host this season is Courtney Hammond. And so I'll have Courtney join me here. We're so excited. Hello. Thanks.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Mackenzie. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, we are so excited you're here. And so, in the previous seasons, we've brought on some of our co-hosts who have like academic expertise, right? Like professors. But Courtney, you're going to bring a different spin and a different kind of expertise to the table, in part with your lived experience, but also your professional roles. So I'll give a little bit of an intro, but then I'll let you fill in the gaps. So, my understanding of the lovely Courtney and her roles, I know her through her work as a volunteer manager at Recovery Community Center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is called CRUSH. And I'm working on the acronym, which stands for Community Resources United to Spread Hope. But then you also serve as a parent partner, right? And then you're a mom of two sweet kids.
Absolutely. So I have been at my role as a parent partner for almost 3 years. We pretty much just advocate and help navigate the DHS system or DHHS system now
Yes.
that so I have the experience as a child and as an adult going through the DHS system. We help them get successful case closure, which looks different in many ways. Reunification is a very common and our most common goal, but sometimes termination, foster care, or adoption can go that way as well. And that is a success for the case. So
Yes.
just kind of try to advocate for that and to help them navigate.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a volunteer coordinator or manager, I help rally volunteers to help run our center. They are really the bread and butter of our center. They help make all the decisions. They have the final calls on groups. They know what the community needs. I'm just merely here to help it make it happen. They have all the ideas. They bring everything to the table. They get out in the community. They do a lot of the muscle work here. And it really just makes the community center welcoming, and it's an essential to the center.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, in addition to this professional expertise you have, our podcast season, I really should share that. Like, why is Courtney here? I talked about her expertise, but our podcast season really thinking about parenting through challenges. And so, your professional roles really overlap with a lot of parents who have experienced significant challenges.
Absolutely.
But also if you want to share it all about kind of your personal experience, I mean, as a parent
Yeah.
and just who you are as a person.
So I am a child of an addict and alcoholic. Grew up I was adopted by my grandparents. So I've had struggles with life since, a very young age.
Mhm.
And I was a very young mother right out of high school. So the challenges of being a child, raising a child, and what kind of happened with all that and what I changed since. And then also being an active addiction. I am in long-term recovery. I have 3.5 years off all mind-altering substances.
Yes.
And I still learn and remain teachable. And that's one thing I have never done before. And I think that's what's really been a great challenge, but mind-opening experience as well.
That's great.
I'm lost again.
You're like, I don't know. That's what I have to say about me.
Yeah.
So that's great. One, we are excited for one, I thank you for your willingness to kind of show up, have these conversations with us, be authentic and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And yeah, tapping into your lived experience as well as your professional expertise, I think is going to be so valuable as we talk through some of these concepts. And even as we were kind of getting to know each other a little more and walking through this episode together, some of the things that you reminded me, you're like, wait, what are you talking about, lady? And so it's good for me too, of like, hey, I'm geeky about this stuff. And sometimes that means I don't want to get caught up in it, right? I want to be
Yeah.
able to share it with people in a meaningful way. So I'm also excited for you to be like, hey, hold on. You're losing literally everybody. So,
Like I need it simplified.
yes, translate, Mackenzie, translate. So excited to have you here. Well, as I started to share, this podcast season is about parenting through challenges. And so, Courtney, like we've said, your lived experience and your professional expertise, you're going to be here teaching us all season long through these episodes. And for listeners who have, I mean, seasoned listeners, which I kind of love that pun of like, yeah, you've listened to a lot of seasons. But for our listeners who've been around for a while, you might remember season 6, we talked about resilience. And so there's going to be some similarities, but we're really kind of taking a different spin. Instead of just thinking about resilience, we're thinking about the practicalities of parenting when there's challenges and barriers. And so that's what we're going to dig into. But as you've heard on every season, we will be talking about research and reality. Each episode is going to include practical strategies for parenting through whatever challenges we're talking about. And it's been a long time since we've walked through some of our like beliefs and values. And so, what better time than when we bring on a new co host? So, Courtney, you heard me say it earlier, but I'm going to tell everybody again.
Okay.
At the Science of Parenting, we believe that there is no place for shame or blame on else's reality. I've gotten the sense from almost every conversation we've ever had that that aligns with your beliefs as well.
Absolutely.
We also believe that parents are experts on their kids. You know your child in a way that another, like I might be a quote unquote parenting expert, but I don't know your child the way you do. So you're an expert on your own kids. We believe that all parents deserve access to trustworthy information so that they can make decisions about their family. And then we also believe there's more than one way to raise great kids. So my approach to doing something and your approach to doing something can look different, and they can both be great. So we're going to keep these in mind throughout this season. But for now, we get to kind of dive in.
Yay.
Yeah. So we're gonna be talking about resilience. Which similar, like I said, to season 6. But even before we get there, as we think about this theme of parenting through challenges, you and I started to have this conversation about cycle breaking. And I feel like that's a really important place for us to start.
Absolutely.
Um, and so, you shared a little about your experience and the way that you were raised. And research tells us that the way we were raised is like one of the biggest influences on how we parent our own kids. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that for some of us, some people are like intentionally replicating the way they were raised, right? Like I have a great relationship with my parents, or I really enjoyed my childhood or whatever, and then they're doing what they saw. So they have X number of years of what was modeled for them. And then for others, that's like the opposite experience, right? I have this
Yeah.
experience that I'm trying to unlearn to do new things. And so I don't know, just what do you think about this concept of cycle breaking and its role in parenting through challenges?
I think it's very important to recognize toxic and unhealthy cycles, even though you've been taught them or believe in them. Some things just aren't
Yeah.
healthy.
Mhm.
Um, living, being taken in consideration where you were raised, how you were raised, and why you were raised like that is a huge component. I
Mm.
feel like it's important too.
Yeah.
I was a kind of a difficult child, so my grandparents who raised me, had to parent me, accordingly. I didn't like it. They were also very simple farm people. We
Mm.
did our chores. We had these clean cut and dry rules, and I just wouldn't conform.
Mm.
Um, a lot of abandonment issues, a lot of, things that I didn't agree with and I couldn't conform to or follow suit. And it caused and it wreaked a lot of havoc in my life.
Yeah.
Being not being able to express ourselves, down to using what kind of soap do we want to use. We had to use
Mm.
bar soap. I hate bar soap.
Oh, yeah.
Just little things like that that I'm like, you know what? If I wanted my fan on, we had to ask permission to have a fan on.
Mm.
Just little things like that.
Yeah.
So I think recognizing those cycles and what they did to not, put your kids through that. Like they do have an opinion. Kids do have a right to feel what they feel.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I'm or fortunate or unfortunate, I'm not sure what to use.
Yeah.
I can recognize that and I know how uncomfortable and how like limiting it was for me. So I try not to parent my kids like that. I try to break
Mm.
those cycles daily.
Mhm.
Me and Mackenzie talked, prior to this about food and
Yes.
just the privilege of having food. Yes, it's
Mm.
expensive. Yes, it's kind of like, one of those things like when, you you have to have it. But if my kid's hungry, she's hungry. She's a growing
Mhm.
teenager. My grandma who I live with is not like that.
Yeah.
She
She has a
makes
different
supper.
mindset.
Yeah,
Mhm.
breakfast is here, lunch is here, maybe a snack, and then a full course dinner.
Mm.
No,
Mhm.
we snack. We're snackers.
Mm.
Um, breaking those cycles of making sure that my kids for sure feel comfortable,
Mhm.
and aren't afraid to eat or wanna hide from eating or, hide
Yeah.
from their expression of themselves,
Yes.
I try to break those cycles, that way building resiliency
Yeah. Yeah.
is more possible and
Mhm.
easier, to cope and to be able to feel
Mhm.
comfortable in this life.
Mhm. Well, and a lot of what I hear you saying, I feel like my, like, parenting educator brain, right? The, like, terminology comes to mind to me is I really hear you breaking cycles around rigidity, right? So, like, that this is the only way, this is how it has to be, right? And as I can even say, like, there are probably some areas in my life as a parent where I am rigid.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and right? Like, and that you're really working hard to be intentional about your responsiveness and flexibility. So breaking that cycle around rigidity.
yeah,
Um, and so, I mean, and I think about, the way was raised, there are components of it that I am like, yes, you know what? I liked that, or I think that's valuable, and I want to do the same thing with my kids. And there are aspects that I'm like, I don't want to do the same thing. I want to do this a different way. And so I
yeah,
think just acknowledging I guess, acknowledging a few things. One, every parent is starting at a different baseline, right? So if
absolutely.
I'm starting at a place where most of my childhood is what I want to replicate for my own children, there are advantages to that, and that, like, the energy it takes is less because it's what you already know, it's what you've been taught your whole life,
Yeah,
right? Versus the time or energy it takes for someone who's like, "The way I was raised was incredibly harmful, and I don't wanna do that to my kids." That takes a lot of energy and attention,
yeah.
and intention, right? And a lot of reflection and honestly sometimes pain, to do that.
I have to check my intentions and my intent every time I go to speak to my children,
Mhm.
mostly because I have completely from scratch started over multiple times, and
Yes.
they're so different in age that you have and I'm a different person, so I have to check myself
Mhm.
real thoroughly before I go through with a big decision or a
Mhm.
big change, and I have to prioritize what cycle I'm going to break because I can't break all of them.
No.
And
No.
if it's and that's an unreal expectation. So like if Lexi say she's going to be 13 on Friday. If
Mhm.
she has a chore to take out the garbage every Thursday and she misses it, I'm not going to take anything from her. My
Mm.
grandma and grandpa, on the other hand, if we missed that, we would be punished by having, something pulled from us. And I was like,
Yeah.
I was just busy. I was out playing. I was tired. I was at my
Mhm.
friend's house, like just those little things like that. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
I have to make sure when I do that, I am checking fully what the
Yes.
effects are of that and if it's
Yes.
actually the right time.
Yes, and that's we talk in other episodes about, like, natural and logical consequences, but also about grace, right? And how you balance all of those things together. And what I hear you talking about with checking your intention, I think is such a valuable skill for us as parents, especially parents who are doing some cycle breaking of like the way I was raised, I'm trying to unlearn this component, even if it's not in its entirety, but
Mhm.
like this part, this particular cycle, um, checking your intention because what might be, I mean, there's a lot of research to tell us what is innate to our brain is likely the way we were raised, even if we didn't like it.
Yeah,
So my brain will revert to that without like thought. It's just like where it's automatically the instinct is to go there, even if I'm like, actually, that's not what I actually want to do. But our brains will revert to that. And so I think
absolutely.
that intention check is so valuable. So
And
valuable.
it's necessity. So like if you're getting ready
Hmm.
to do something that you know is going to create big change in your family, you
Hmm.
have to be I'm a single mom, so I have to be able to fully support that cycle. I can't just start it
Yes.
today and be like, well,
Mm.
eh, I'm not,
Like I changed my mind.
yeah, like you have to be
Yes.
committed to it. And like I said, commitment doesn't look perfect and it's not.
Hmm. Hmm.
But as long as you keep consistent, and that's what I found worked best for my children. Liam, on the
Hmm.
other hand, he's a crazy 2-year-old, so consistency is really hard for for me with him.
Yes.
But
Yes.
keeping Lexi, we're building our
Mhm.
trust back.
Mm.
That's something
Mhm.
that I never. I mean, they think I should have had, but I didn't. I had zero trust in my parents.
Yes.
So I know how easy it is to lose and how hard it is to get back. So consistency with Lexi, even if it's like little things like, hey, scrape your plate and rinse it off. I don't care if you put it in the dishwasher, I'll do it later.
Mm.
Let's just make sure we're rinsing it off.
And
Little.
finding out what that is for you, right? Like
Yeah.
identifying these are the consistency, these are the
Mhm.
expectations. And yeah, maybe mine is you have to put it in the dishwasher, or maybe mine is you have
Yeah.
to take at our house right now, our kids are 3 and 6, and so like our expectation is you have to take it to the counter,
Yeah.
right? And then like it doesn't
Exactly.
need to be the same thing. It
Mhm.
needs to be ideally like consistent across time.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So thank you for walking through that with us. And I think but just this idea, I wanted us to start out this whole season thinking about as our listeners reflect, where is my baseline? And not comparison to like, am I doing better or worse than other people? But comparison, not even comparison. I don't know. I don't have a better word, but comparison for empathy,
Yeah.
right? As I look at another parent who, oh, maybe I might be tempted to be like, ugh, right? They don't have it together or whatever that like negative thought or judgment might be. But that we remember, like, I don't know their baseline.
Right.
That their baseline may be totally different from mine and their progress is huge. And that this one little piece of the puzzle I'm seeing isn't the whole thing. And
Yep.
so as we think about this episode is really about raising resilience. This is kind of what we're talking about. And so how do we raise resilient kids? How do we be resilient parents? How do we have resilient families? And so that cycle breaking and this idea of like just because it's how my parents did it doesn't mean it's how I have to do it. That takes a lot of energy. And so as we think about resilience and our coping skills we build, that all comes into it. So I do. Courtney like gave us a little sneak peek of, she used the word resilience earlier. I do want to. Everybody knows that listens a lot. I like a definition. So the Child Traumatic Stress Network defines family resilience as a family's ability to maintain or resume effective functioning, including care of its members, following potentially traumatic events. So that's like the formal terminology. In other words, how a family can like bounce forward or rise from the ashes or whatever after experiencing something difficult. So, Courtney and I also had a really great conversation around, is resilience a personal trait or is it something that's buildable? So, Courtney, what would you say? Is resilience a personal trait?
No,
Right?
not after learning from you, it's not, but it was something I was taught, it was something
Hmm.
that, like, it's that old school way of thinking, like, you
Hmm.
either have it or you don't, and if you don't have it, then here's what your path looks like, and mind you,
Hmm.
my path has been super rocky, but I have appreciated every pebble I've stepped on, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
So this I'm still open-minded, I'm still teachable, and I appreciate the definition now.
Yeah, we were talking about, well, Courtney, kind of the way, I mean, if I can share it,
Yeah,
we were
absolutely.
talking about resilience and you're like, well, I mean, maybe my siblings were a little more resilient, or maybe, my daughter's more resilient. And you're kind of talking about like, I wasn't. I like these hard things happened and I responded in these ways that maybe weren't so positive. And we kind of just had to like, wait, hold on. I gotta be the educator for a second. But for listeners too, in case this is the first time you're hearing it, like Courtney said, so sometimes we think about like you either are resilient or you aren't. And that there's actually a lot of research to tell us resilience is not a trait. Like it's not you have it or you don't. Um, Resilience is buildable. Like it's a set of skills that we and factors that we can like build on and come to, that it's not fixed. So it's not have it or don't. And so thinking about, right, again, that definition of like how a family as a family resilience, right? How our family, but even individual resilience, how we kind of resume effective functioning. How do we move forward after something difficult? Okay, so for something for us to think about too, as we think about this idea of resilience, is how have we been resilient as individuals? And I mean, I think you probably, I mean, I can see so many like resilient things and even just the conversations we've had, traits or not traits, it's not a trait, experiences where you've demonstrated that you're building your resilience. But I guess from my personal experience, I was actually diagnosed with ADHD last year. And so I think of the skills that I've learned for parenting with ADHD. People who've been listening for a long time will know that I've also often talked about how I get overstimulated as a parent and how, that I often feel like I'm just like a mess. And I found out a lot of those things are associated with ADHD. And so learning what are my new boundaries? Like what do I need to develop for coping skills? And I still feel like I have a long way to go, but I want to like pause in this moment and be like, but I'm being resilient, right? I'm being resilient in that I'm learning these new skills. I'm being resilient in that we keep going. Like we keep doing the daily stuff we've got to do while struggling, like while I struggle and muddle through some of this. And that in itself is practicing resilience. You talked earlier, I can't remember if it was in this like while we've been recording or just in conversations we've had, but how, you were raised and that it was challenging for you and then but like look at you now, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
resilience. So like what would you say how you've seen yourself be resilient?
So I think what's so hearing your side and then reflecting back to like not still thinking that old way of thinking. So I think moving out when I was 16
Mm,
was building resilience. I think experiencing the world at my own pace and
mm.
getting the taste of what life meant to me, even being a young mom was building
Yes.
resilience because that was a chance for me to foster something that I had never had. I didn't have much control, but I was still my own. I think being an active addiction and being where I'm at today was a huge key point in my life to build resilience. I had a lot of resentments towards my mom.
Mm,
So now I had a taste firsthand of what that meant. And I'm now 3.5 years clean. I help everybody I can. I am a very aware person. I can identify a lot of things that are now that were toxic and led to a lot
mhm,
of my unhealthy boundaries and relationships to now I can be
mhm.
like, oh, that was that resilience piece. And I have
Yes.
now can put it I can control what I allow and what I don't allow.
Mm,
So I think my whole life has been about building resilience, but the definition I was taught was something I never thought I had. So
mm, well, I'm so glad, like,
thank you.
I hope that you can continue to change that narrative for yourself of like, "Holy cow, look at me. Like, look how resilient I've been."
Yeah.
And I think, you were talking about being a person in long-term recovery and the resilience of now being in a professional role where you're like showing up and caring for people who are in recovery, whether long term or like new to recovery from substance use disorder, and how powerful that is that like you make meaning of this difficult thing that
Oh,
you went through.
absolutely.
And and you talked about like that you went through as a parent,
Yeah.
right? And so there's all those things that build into it. So yes, I see a lot of ways where you have built and continue to build resilience in that. So
Thanks.
that's exciting. So one way that we sometimes talk about resilience is this idea of like risk and protective factors. We have like a whole episode on it back in season 6, but basically, risk factors are like traits or things in your surroundings that maybe create risk for more negative outcomes, while protective factors are the opposite. So, when we can build protective factors, which is what we really like to talk about, sometimes you can't control a risk factor. But like if we can find protective factors, we can build. So, things that are going to help our kids become more resilient. How do we increase them? So, in a textbook literally called The Handbook of Parenting, which I think is like so funny. People are like, there's no handbook. I'm like, actually, there is, but it's not written for everybody. It's like a researcher. So I'm going to try to translate it from the handbook. But according to a chapter, the authors are Masson and Palmer of that chapter in the book of Handbook of Parenting. But they talk about what we do as parents that can help build resilience or like that are protective factors. So they talk about three things that allow or encourage our kids to positively adapt to like adversity or challenges. So here's the three things: sensitivity and warmth. So when as parents we can practice that, monitoring, and then consistent discipline. So I actually want I'll we can walk through the three of these. I'll explain them with a little more depth. But as we do that, I'd love for us to just kind of have a conversation
Yeah.
about like where we feel like we're doing well, or components of it we're doing well, or components of it we're continuing to build on. So the first one being sensitivity and warmth. As examples, this could be positive connection time. It could be with our kids. So it could be like physical touch. It could be playing a game together. It could be watching a show. It can be any kind of positive connection with them. It might be playfulness. And these are examples, right? This is not the way to do
Yeah.
sensitive pain work. These are examples. But it could be playfulness. It could be just being there for them when they're having a hard time. It might be being attentive to their physical and emotional needs. So this kind of warmth that our kids feel, I think of like coziness is the warmth, right? That our kids feel like they're safe their safety with us is an important part of sensitivity and warmth. So,
Yeah.
what do you think about that as we do that as parents?
So, like I said, I have 2 kids who are 2 completely different humans and ages. So,
Yes.
my warmth and sensitivity is very fluid. I don't just
Yes.
have one way
Mhm.
to show, because what I would do for my 13-year-old, who I'm rebuilding a parent-child relationship with, is
Mhm.
different than what I would do to my 2-year-old who's never had a taste of any kind of, my mom
Mm.
under the influence. So,
Yes.
but for the most part, like, my whole, sensitivity and warmth process is just to provide a safe space.
Mm.
My kids, Liam too, he has already been through a lot, and that's because he lost his dad. That's something I'm
Yes.
gonna have to grow up and be sensitive to his whole life, and have
Mhm.
to, really provide that space for him and hold a space. That's important, not
Mm.
to just provide, but to hold. And then
Mhm.
Alexis, I don't always deserve her emotional and physical presence, and I'm okay with
Mm.
that. She has a boundary. Sometimes she doesn't want to talk to me about some things, and I don't push her and I don't badger her either. I'm like, okay, you know what? I
Mhm.
understand. This is a boundary, and I'm gonna and you know it's okay. And I also let
Yes.
her know that no is a complete sentence for everybody.
Mhm.
Grandma, moms, aunts, school teachers, other kids, your brother, me. You can say no, and that is 100% okay. I
Yes.
might not like it,
Yeah.
but I will not push your boundaries.
Yes.
That's kind of where I get my sense. And I do like to play.
Mhm.
I'm learning. My brain is still processing a lot of things coming from active addiction. A lot of
Yes.
experiences I've had to unlearn, breaking cycles.
Yeah.
So what I would do when I did with Lexi at 2 years old, when I was 19, 18,
Mm.
is 100% different than what I'm doing with Liam at 30, 31. It's
Yes.
a whole different human. I'm not that immature child raising a child. I'm not, I'm a
Mhm.
more responsible, I'm a more very productive human. I wouldn't just go to college and raise kids.
Mm.
So I'm it's very difficult for me to like have experience, what I've been taught, and then what's going to work for
Mm.
me in the future. I'm kind of just
Yes.
really just taking it all in, and I take it day by
Mhm.
day.
Yeah. And you've kind of alluded to this. So, I mean, since we're kind of talking about it, so you were in active addiction for part of your daughter's life, right?
10
And then
years.
now,
10 years.
yeah. And so then now you're in recovery, no longer using substances, which is so exciting and congratulations and all
Thank you.
of the wonderful things. And so we are going to talk about this later in the season, like strategies for rebuilding and repairing relationships with our kids. So you're kind of hinting, you're like giving us all these little tidbits along
Oh,
the way until we get to that season, or that episode, which is great. Um, and that you are in a unique spot, right? We were talking about baselines, right?
yeah,
And so, yes, you have a 13-year-old and you're in a unique spot that it's not like, yes, we have 13 years of this where I've been building this sensitivity and warmth, right? You're rebuilding in a different way.
absolutely. From
Um,
scratch, from scratch.
yes. Yeah, and your cycle breaking on top of it related to that. And
Yeah.
so, thank you for sharing us with that, and being honest and vulnerable about it. Um, and so, as I think about my sensitivity and warmth and how I provide that for my kids, I'll even say like between my co-parent and I, right? So my husband, my temperament, like my innate, I'm a little more silly than he is naturally. And so I would say my playfulness is probably a little more silliness from time to time. And then there are times when I have no silly to offer. Right. So it's not about like I'm always warm or I'm always sensitive. But so I would say one of my strengths is probably like the playfulness, silliness at times. Um, and that one of my other strengths I feel like is I work really hard to hold emotional space for my kids. Right. To like you were talking about, like accepting like you're mad about this or you're whatever. Um, and again, that's not an always, it's not a perfection, it's a progress, it's a
Mhm.
journey. But those are some kind of strengths that I'd say I have. And that when it comes to sensitivity and warmth, I would say it's hard for me to be sensitive to their emotional needs when I'm like overstimulated, overwhelmed. Like you are freaking out about this tiny thing and I have this huge other thing in my brain.
Yeah.
Right? And like that's hard. That's an area I continue to work on for improvement.
And Lexi, like we shared earlier that, because of her resilience and because of the way I don't want to say abandoned her, but I've
Mm.
literally she had to grow up quick. So she
Yeah.
holds that space for me. as a
Mm,
child to a parent.
mhm,
She provides me a safe space. When I
mhm.
found out my son's dad had overdosed and passed away, I was like 6 months clean. I had no idea how to feel anything. Plus being pregnant with
Yes.
him, she just hugged me. She just hugged me.
Mm,
She didn't
yeah.
say nothing because she knew there was nothing. She just held that safe space, and if
Mhm,
I'm in the store or if Liam's kind of really working me up in my overstimulated
mhm,
craziness, or if
mhm,
we're at Walmart and she sees beads of sweat, she's like,
mhm.
"Mom, just drop everything." She's like, "We don't have to pay for this. We
Like,
can
we
leave."
can just go.
Yeah, she's like, "We
Yeah.
don't owe Walmart nothing." She's like, "Leave." So she
Mhm,
holds that spot for me
mm,
as a child, adult
mhm,
relation, but that's something that I have unknowingly given her to be
mhm.
able, as a 13, 12-year-old, she'll be 13 on Friday, to
Mm.
actually care about somebody else's feelings in safe space.
Yes.
So it was kind of like, one of those miracles where my mess up has created something beautiful. And
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
blessed, literally.
Right, and so to be able to build that positive, parent-child relationship that there is space for both of you to feel things,
Mm,
right? And so that yeah, that relationship of and the emotional warmth, I think, is a big part of it, but also physical needs, right? That we're sensitive and aware of those too. So, all right, number 2 on that list was monitoring. So this is really the idea of like knowing where our kids are, what they're up to. It's also about creating environments that are safe for our kids. And that can be from like baby proofing safe environment to like trying to create spaces in our home where they're like physically not danger, right? And so that
yeah,
like, so I think of like domestic violence situations, right? How do you create safety and things like that? So that can be part of monitoring. It can also be things like knowing what our kids are up to online or where they spend their time, like which friends' house, other places besides home. And so monitoring, I think, we often think about it, or I should say, as a parenting educator, we often talk about it with teens. Like, what's your teen doing? What are they up to? And that's valuable, right? That's one of the ways we help make resilient teens that
mhm,
we are still monitoring them. But we're not saying like you need to do X as much as we're saying finding a way of monitoring that does keep our kids safe.
yeah,
That we do kind of know what's going on. We're not telling you which things you need to know, where you need to know, all that. Um, but and monitoring looks so different. You actually got to this earlier, so your kids are like 13 and 2, right? And you were talking about, well, it's different. It's so different between the two of them. I'm like, yes, because they're different ages. Monitoring a toddler is so different than monitoring like a preteen.
yeah, yeah. So, and like, always our age and the way our society really is right now, like, you have to be able to provide a safe space on the internet.
Yes, it's a
It's just
part
the
of our
thing.
parenting
Yeah.
now.
Um, I don't push her. Her phone's kind of like her diary. Like,
Mm,
she logs a lot of stuff in there. She has a lot of feelings in there. And if she's talking about me to one of her friends,
mm,
why would I invade that space?
mm,
Again, we're starting out friends. There's
mm,
a lot of repair there.
mhm,
For the most part, it's going really well. But some days, like, I'm just not going to go and explore your phone. But
mm,
as long as you have Snapchat, I
mm,
have access to your lock code.
mm, mhm,
I can see where her location is, and sometimes, like, she doesn't have phone time all the time. It's when my pocket can afford it, or because our money
mhm,
is prioritized.
mhm.
But I do have access to her phone. If I need to use it, I use it. It's the same lock code as
Yes.
mine. But I don't want to be a helicopter parent either. That was one thing that really drove me away from my grandma and grandpa, was the constant monitoring. I'm like, my goodness,
Mm,
I'm outside playing. I'm
mm,
okay. Lexi has she knows at 8:30 she has to come inside. And if she's not, then that's, if she hasn't called me or hasn't answered my phone, then I start worrying, but it rarely ever happens.
yeah.
Liam, on the other hand, I monitor him too much to where it becomes a very obsessive,
Mm,
very anxiety driven monitoring. And I'm working on it. I'm going to
mhm.
therapy for it.
Yeah.
I think it's because his life, I've seen his dad go so fast. There was no
Mhm,
warning. And I have PTSD from getting my children ripped from DHS. I have a lot of
mhm,
issues. So for him, I have to give myself a boundary. Like, "Hey, Courtney, it's okay to go shower for 5 minutes without him.
mm.
Hey, Courtney,
Yes.
it's okay to leave him in front of the TV for while you go outside and cool down."
Mhm.
So it's, like I said, completely two different. Some I don't wanna invade, others I invade too much, and I have to remind myself that that's unhealthy.
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
Oh, it totally does. It totally does. Well, and honestly, the I hear a lot. you're talking about where you have found your balance, right?
Mhm,
Like that these are the ways that I monitor, or these feel like they're in alignment with my values,
mhm.
right? Like the values that I have. And that it's okay if my values and your values are the same or different.
Yeah,
And but that you're finding a way that's in line with yours. And I also like that this idea of even within this like the same family, like you're the same parent and but for two different kids, it's two different things.
awesome.
And I think that of my daughter's temperament, uh, because of just who she is different. So I monitor her differently than I monitored my son at the age he is.
Yeah,
Just because of one of them was like a little quicker to take risk and one of them is a little slower to take risk. And so it's about kind of being agile to the child. But that this is something monitoring is something we can do in whatever form that is in alignment with our values and helpful to our kids to help keep them safe,
absolutely.
right? And then the third one is consistent discipline. And people who've listened to the podcast for a long time know that we use this word consistent a lot. It comes up a lot. I want to reiterate that it is not about perfection. Consistent is about most of the time. All right. So, like over time, think of like the lifelong parenting journey you have, or even think about a month. Don't think about this day, right? Think about over a month. That kind of, in general, that was the consistency. So, sometimes we think about discipline exclusively as like punishment or like responding to bad behavior, but it can also be about the ways that they're more proactive. Discipline is proactive in that it can be how we build the positive relationships with our kids, how we're clear about expectations on the front end, right? You were really like saying you're really clear about like the time you need to be home is 8:30,
Yep,
right? And that's a clear expectation. That's discipline.
yep.
And so figuring out what those things are, like how we teach them expectations, how we praise them for behavior we like even between my kids, right? They sometimes get like little spats, like, I really liked how you walked away when you got upset. That's discipline. Um, but it's also the I'm not going to let you hit your brother. That's also discipline. So the consistency is about really providing our kids with some predictability over time. So that in general. So as I think about consistent discipline, I feel like consistency is a thing that's hard for me. I think part of it is parenting with ADHD,
Mhm.
but also just the ebbs and flows that of different parenting stages and your life and all of those things. But I would say I work really hard to provide clear expectations, and I think that's something that's a strength for me, even though it's not perfect, right? But I do think in general that's probably consistent that my kids do know what I expect on a given thing. What would you
And
feel like is a strength for you?
oh Lord.
You've
My
got some, I know you do.
Oh Lord. So
Ugh.
I think my strength when it comes to, like, consistent discipline, like, and I like that you explained what discipline means because a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't spank my kids." Like that's
Mhm,
not even at all what I
mhm.
think when I think of discipline.
Yeah.
I think of setting expectations, boundaries, the whole
Mhm.
thing about, hey, like, so you have to be in the house at 8:30. If not, I'm gonna come looking for you. And if you, you know,
Yes. Well,
because I
like the
go,
natural and logical consequences that
yeah.
can go with those
Mhm.
things, like, that is consistent discipline.
Yeah. And
I do what I
Liam,
say I'm gonna do.
yep, and Mike Lexi knows that. First of all,
Mhm.
because 'cause I'm just that very open person, but
Yeah.
Liam, like, I have a consistent discipline, like, you will sit at the table, you will eat. You don't have
Mhm.
to finish it.
Mhm.
I don't But when we're all here
Clear
eating,
expectation.
when I'm eating, Liam, that's my one time to eat,
Mhm.
that and not chase you. So I would
Mhm.
appreciate it if you sat here quietly
Mm.
and
Mhm.
just sat. Let me eat. So
Mhm.
I have consistent things. That's one of my strengths is that we do eat as a family.
Yeah.
That's one thing I have rolled over from my parenting, from watching my grandma and grandpa parent me, is I
Yeah.
do love eating as a family. We don't do a whole lot of phones at the table.
Mhm.
I can be very disassociated sometimes myself, just being me, and I
Mhm.
know that we have to not do that. So phones at the table, Liam not watching videos, we shut the TV off, we eat as a family. That's
Mhm.
one of my strengths. Another thing is
Yeah.
letting Alexis know that consistency looks different
Mm.
depending on what's going on in our family that day.
Mhm.
And letting her know that, like, I'm not treating Liam any more different than I'm treating you. He's just two.
Yes.
Or why did he get this instead of this for supper? Or why did he get a toy at Walmart? It's just to
Mm.
It's just for mom. It's not because he's doing anything great. It's just a literally, it's not any unfair. Like there's no unfairness here. It's just the
Mm.
age. I think that's one of
Yes.
my strengths too, is being able to tell her and explain in a healthy way,
Yes.
you know.
It is hard with like siblings, right? The comparison is like, oh, it's huge. It's not fair. That's like a
Yeah.
huge
Oh,
in our
the
house,
not fair. Oh,
right? But I think that our ability to validate that feeling behind it while holding the like, well, this is appropriate because your like sibling's a toddler and you're not, right?
yeah.
We often talk about I actually borrowed this from a coworker of like that sometimes fair isn't the same.
No.
Right? And so, like, creating that as, like, a family understanding and mantra, that's a form of discipline. So
It's the equitable.
yes.
I am a very equitable parent, but,
Yes.
you wouldn't put Lexi on a trike with 3
Right?
wheels,
Because
but you
she's
want
a
Liam.
preteen.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so when I explained to her what equitable meant, God,
Mhm.
I cannot say that word, what that meant, it really triggered her to be like, "Oh, okay, well, Liam, has this and this, but it's because he has to have that as a baby,"
Mhm. It's just
and
different.
yep, and that's
Mhm.
kind of one of my strengths, that it's I think I'm a consistent, disciplined person, is, you know, maintaining those spots, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
absolutely. Yes, it does. So, yeah, so we're really digging in, right, on resilience and thinking specifically about our parenting, right? And so we talked about providing sensitivity and warmth. We talked about monitoring and then providing consistent discipline. And so that those are three areas the research tells us where we can help our kids build just doing those things is going to
Mhm.
help build their resilience. There are other things we're going to talk about this season where it's like this is a specific strategy or specific thing, but in general, providing sensitivity and warmth is going to help our kids be resilient. Monitoring them is going to help our kids be resilient. Having consistent discipline over time in general is going to help our kids build resilience. And so we want to think a lot about that this season on resilience. And then as you may or may not know, I don't know if I've told you this, Courtney, that we usually wrap up with some kind of strategy before we go all the way to our closing. And so
Okay.
I actually want to post something. It's more of a mindset, a reframe, a way of thinking than it is just a specific strategy. But this is something from Dr. Tina Payne Bryson. She is an author and a psychologist, I believe, but um, is known for the book No Drama Discipline, as well as The Power of Showing Up. Really, really great parenting books that I personally love. But she has this little formula she talks about for creating resilience. So, adversity or like challenges or trauma, okay, that's the term she uses. So, adversity without support creates fragility, right? That like we have fragile children. But adversity with support creates resilience,
Love that.
right? So what is in the formula is the same, right? The challenge didn't go away. It's not like, well, if we can just eliminate any challenge that would ever happen to our kids, that's not necessarily what resilience is. But that this happened and we provided support for. Like we supported our child, we helped build their skills, we held space like you were talking about, and that's what helped create resilience. So, as we think about how to raise resilient kids in the midst of challenges, at the baseline, we can support them. We
Oh, yeah.
can support them through that hard time. And so, I actually just want to like, okay, if that's our strategy is we're going to have support. We're going to support our kids when there's adversity and challenges. So I just want to like, so hey, what are we going to do this week? So as a parent, I want the two of us to just say, how are we going to support our kids this week? And so I'm actually going to go really simple on that question. And we're kind of, yeah, in this like transitiony family stage right now and just like transition time of the year. One of the ways I'm going to support my kids, and sometimes I should say that challenges sometimes with that transition can be hard for my kids. So I'm going to support them by letting them know what's coming.
Okay.
Tomorrow we have X, or next week we're getting ready for this thing. So one of the ways I want to support my kids this week in this transition that's kind of a hard time is letting them know what to expect and what's coming.
Love
What
that.
about you? What's one simple way you're going to support your kids?
Again, I'm just going to hold that safe space.
Mm,
Um, not that my house is unsafe, but my grandma does have Alzheimer's.
Mm.
Sometimes it is very difficult for my daughter to accept that the woman who helped raise her is not the same woman,
Yes.
and says some kind of hurtful things sometimes. So I'm just going to continue to hold that safe space. She's at work with me today. So
Yes.
having a Lexi and mommy day while,
Mhm.
doing what I do in love is kind of that. And then with Liam,
Mhm.
I'm going to allow him to be more expressive and not get so
Mm.
overstimulated about it. That's how I'm going to
Okay.
support that little boy. And I have to
Yeah.
remind myself that I'm both parents. I'm not just
Mm.
mom. So
Mhm.
whether that's going out and wrestling with him in the yard, getting muddy, making mud pies, letting
Mhm.
him express himself in some kind of rough fashion, I will
Alright.
I will support that this week.
Yeah, I love that, holding space for however he's showing up authentically.
Mm.
I love that. Awesome. Well, this brings us to something called our Stop Breathe Talk space, where we bring in our producer, Mackenzie DeYoung, and she asks us a question kind of on the theme of the episode. So, what do you got for us today, Kens?
All right. Well, I will. I was just listening to one of the older episodes where I kind of feel like I brought a hard question to Suzanne. I won't do that to you, Courtney.
Okay,
Be
please.
nice.
I just want to know, and I feel like we've all just through the process of starting this season and starting to record and talking to one another, we've had a lot of ahas and things that we've learned. So, what is one thing, one aha you've gained from this episode? One thing you've learned through creating this episode?
You got
Mm.
me.
Do it up if you got one.
Got
That
an idea.
Mackenzie brought up that resilience is not a trait. I am just I'm just like, I feel like, so I've had that weigh on me for since
Mm.
I was like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Mm,
Like, because I'm not resilient, I became a drug addict,
Mm.
and that's just the bottom line of how I felt, 31
Yes.
years.
yeah.
Today, that weight is literally
Ooh,
like, wow.
ooh,
Mm.
ooh. I
Yeah,
just
That's
I
gonna make me teary, Courtney.
I
know.
know, and
It
then
always up
I'm like, "You know what? I
Mm.
am resilient. I am
hard.
resilient a
Yes.
lot," and I'm, like, super proud of myself now. Like, I don't have a whole lot of confidence, but
Mm.
that really just, like, "Boop,"
Heck
little
yeah.
Oh, I
little
love
bit.
that. I love that. Gosh, I would say, uh, well, the resilience as a personal trait, that's like a cognitive thing that I know, and, like, I remember learning in school, and that, like, that's not what it is. It's not a have it or don't have it. But so that was, like, the way you're talking about it, and for me starting to recognize, like, wait, you're talking about it as a personal trait. This is not a, like, no, you build this quarter. You have this. You've been building it. So that was definitely, like, that was a significant moment for me as well. But I'll also just say, as I was putting the episode together, this idea that we use for the strategy of, like, adversity with or without support is really gonna determine or impact the outcome. And so
Mhm.
as I think about our kids, that so often as parents, we're like, we want to protect them from the hard things in life, which comes from, like, a really good place, especially if we've been through hard things
Mhm.
that we then don't want to see our kids go through it. But that I may or may not be able to control the challenging thing they experience. But what I can impact is how I support them in that. And
Absolutely.
that it is either right can create this of, like, yeah, that can create resilience. That just, like,
Mhm.
that showing up is so powerful in supporting them in that. And so I'd say that's like an aha that I feel like I am gonna carry into what I'm doing with my kids is, like, I can't control that this happened to you or that this is happening, but I can show up. Like, I can be here and support you in it.
Mhm.
So that's probably
Mhm.
mine.
Love that.
Love that. And I just have to say, like, just in this amount of time we've spent together, I feel like I've learned and grown, and I just look forward to the rest of the season.
Mm.
Seriously. So everyone listening, oh, you're in for a good treat here as we complete this season. I'm excited for it. So, thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, Kens, and thanks. That one wasn't so hard. That one wasn't supposed to be. Sometimes when you don't know what's coming, it's like, what is she gonna ask us? Oh, so thanks for playing along with that, Courtney. We'll do that each episode. That she'll ask us something, and we'll just kind of share our insights or lack of.
Yeah.
So, well, that's what we have for our first episode this season on raising resilience. Thinking about how cycle breaking is a part of that, and how, yeah, you might not feel resilient, but that you're building your resilience. And as you look back, and honestly, that idea of like how far we've come, when you can think of it that way, you can often see your resilience in a different way. So
Absolutely.
there's so much good stuff there. And we hope this is meaningful for all of you. And there's so much more to come. One thing we're adding this season that we haven't done before is we want to kind of sign off with a little like positive affirmation or some positive language on the theme of the episode. So, this idea behind this first one is probably going to sound familiar to people who've been listening for a long time. But our affirmation for today that you can repeat to yourself, that I am genuinely repeating to myself in my personal life, there are no good or bad parents. I am doing my best right now, and I can keep growing and learning as a parent. So as you think about resilience and as you think about raising resilient kids, there are no good or bad parents. I'm doing my best right now, and I can keep growing and learning as a parent. So there's more good stuff to come. We hope that everything we share in the podcast helps you on that mission to grow and learn as a parent. But can you tell us what's coming next in our next episode, Courtney?
Absolutely. So in our next episode, we talk about parenting under stress and talk about a concept called good enough parenting.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about good enough parenting and where that comes from. So, thanks for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. A friendly reminder that you can subscribe or follow our weekly audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. So, come along so we don't miss the rest of the episodes that are coming yet this season.
Yeah. So come along as we tackle our ups and downs, the ins and outs, and research the and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.
This project was supported by the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, Bureau of Substance Use, via a subaward from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The contents of this episode are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of, nor are they an endorsement by, Iowa DHHS, SAMHSA, HHS, or the U.S. government.